My name's Sabrina Romanoff. Thanks for joining my podcast. Super excited to speak with Dr. Nick Potkalitsky. He's the CEO of Pragmatic AI Solutions, publisher of the Educating AI Substack, and has over 20 years of experience as a teacher. Super excited to have you here, Nick.
Hi, Sabrina. Thanks for having me on. Just excited to have a great conversation here about AI and education. So much is changing so quickly right now.
Yeah, would love to hear a little bit more about your background, Nick. How did you get into teaching and what are you doing today?
Yeah, I've taken kind of a long, winding path through education. I started out as a Latin teacher in the secondary, and I loved every minute of that. And I love the way that that language worked in particular with sort of like mathematical precision. And I love the way that it really helped my students develop deep critical and analytical thinking skills, coding with language in a certain sense. I certainly got bit by some graduate courses I was taking in English and then sort of rode that all the way through a PhD and focused on like narrative studies and rhetoric and contemporary American lit, but sort of felt a calling back to secondary. And I had this like new field of study and brought all these big critical ideas back to the secondary space and have been just having a lot of fun teaching in a smaller private school here for the past 5 years. And it's been an amazing opportunity for me being in an independent school because, now since AI has kind of arrived, my school's given me a lot of opportunities to develop innovative curriculum and to take on some different leadership opportunities outside of my teaching, to develop an AI consultancy. So,
And did the school initially embrace it? Like, was that always the stance, or has that evolved over the past 2 years?
Independent school culture is always kind of forward leaning towards innovation, and we can kind of pivot a little bit more quickly than like a big public. I initially started in big publics, and there's just lots of infrastructure and lots more policy and lots more committees that you have to kind of go through in order to make changes kind of in the day-to-day life of teaching. And my current school, we didn't really know what to make of AI when it first hit in 2022. And I had my dark night of the soul, and it's like, whoa, what is this? Am I going to have a job in a couple months here? And we had a lot of students kind of getting involved in generating papers. Can we detect this? And how do we have those conversations if we're using AI to detect AI? That was all very unsatisfactory. And so I was doing a lot of deep research in the summer of 2023 and had a real like sea change in terms of how I was going to respond to this. I came out of that summer with sort of like a big strategic plan for my school that was focused on challenges and opportunities that AI was presenting. And the name of my company now was more of a pragmatic response. And that's kind of been the ethos of my work since then, like navigating between sort of the hype and the doomerist kind of, vibes that are out there in the larger like cultural space.
So interesting. So initially you did have what you said, like kind of a draconian response to clamp down on plagiarism. I imagine it's probably a rampant issue at first, but can you talk a little bit more about what your philosophy and thinking and strategy is now, especially in terms of ensuring that kids are able to use AI, but still foster creative thinking? And where do you draw the line between like reliance and over-reliance, and what guidance do you have for teachers who are grappling kind of with the same philosophical and moral issues, like how much of this tool do we embrace in the classroom? How do we do it ethically? And how do we foster creative thinking among students who are using it?
Yeah, that's the hot button question. So there's a lot there to unpack. And my first move here is to think about developing trust between teacher and student as sort of a foundational practice within the first couple weeks of school. Without that trust and sort of rooted in transparency, you're not going to have much success because these tools, they're out there, they're just getting better. And within particularly a high school space, grade competition between students who are competing for valedictorian accolades. They're trying to get into colleges. They're trying to edge each other out in terms of GPAs. And So you have like all these external forces that are driving students to make choices about efficiency in terms of their tool use. So in the very beginning, kind of presenting yourself as a knowing user of AI, this is where there's just such an imperative to kind of rapidly upskill our teachers in terms of they need to be credible AI users sort of on the ground, even to sort of initiate these kind of trust interchanges with students. But that's a whole nother line of thinking that we can kind of talk more about in terms of training. Once you kind of set up some initial framework in terms of I'm going to be asking you to kind of develop some skills over the course of this particular class, and here are the skills that we're going to try to develop. And in some instances, I'm going to ask you to rely on AI tools to develop those skills. In some instances, I'm going to ask you to do that without AI tools. It's sort of like you kind of have to build up a whole rationale about what are we trying to accomplish here, critical thinking and writing skills that you're ultimately going to need to sort of level up in terms of your professional and your academic long-term goals. This is kind of a long answer, but I mean, you have all this like high-level writing and at the end of your high school experience in terms of getting into college. And our students are sort of seeing with AI tools that the tools aren't quite measuring up in terms of like the high level of quality they want. So that's kind of like an angle that we can use to say, if you totally go all AI reliant throughout your high school days, then when it comes to maybe like a higher stakes writing moment, then you just might not have the skills there that you're really going to need. So it's sort of like building up a message about not necessarily don't do it, but why you should spend the time to engage in building the skills, even though the tools can get you maybe like 85% of the way there.
And being able to make your own choices of when does it make sense to go for convenience, even if it may sound a little bit generic. But when does it make sense when you want to maximize your creativity and pour all you can in your writing in order to stand out? Because there are different situations, right, for either of them. And it's really up to students to learn with, teachers' guidance and parents' guidance as well. But for them to learn how to make those decisions, when is it appropriate and what are the trade-offs in using AI 100% in these situations?
Right. It's all about student agency. We're not going to be in the room with them when they're making the choices. So as much as we can amplify that you can make good choices, and as opposed to, no, we're just going to firewall you out of these tools. Those are totally two different options. And most schools are going for like, oh, we're going to firewall you out. That just makes the tool more enticing in my mindset.
And can you walk me through an example curriculum or classroom activity where you're using AI? I just want to get a more visceral understanding of what it would feel like to be a student in your classroom.
So we do like a senior capstone, and these are big, gnarly topics that my students are taking on. And for them to gain like the granular depth in terms of like knowledge base of these topics, like they don't have the time in senior year to do that in light of writing sometimes like 13 to 30 different essays that they have to write to get into college. But we still want them to have like a deep experience in terms of developing interesting pathway through a complex topics. In years past, we've just crammed in like this huge lit review, and there's like a lot of suffering and complaining that goes on because they're doing this in tandem with all this other essay writing. But this year with AI tools, tons of scholarly research, we can use some specific kind of prompting to get access to. So I had them kind of go through an initial round of research after they read maybe 5 sources, did some like annotated bibliography work. So they've done some of their own work and they have some of their own investment and engagement in the project. Then I kind of opened it up and we sort of fed in their existing research. Let me just make sure the audience knows, like we're using kind of a FERPA level protected tool in the classroom. I secured access to that and we fed that in, and then we ask sort of a series of questions, an introduction on this topic, write up a survey of critical research, and essentially like established that granular knowledge, or at least like the AI's version of it, because then we do some reflective writing about some gaps and deficiencies that kind of emerged in light of what the students had already learned. So it's always sort of reflective. We're not just taking the AI's word for it, but it was within 2 weeks. And I'm not a big proponent of AI to accelerate, but we did manage to get them to a place where they were starting to propose topic ideas, as opposed to having to October, which is like prime time for college app. They didn't have to write this 20 source sort of lit review thing. They're still somewhat excited about the capstone, which is usually by this point in the year, they're hating it, So I think I got a win-win, and they have a little bit more knowledge on the broader field, and they're starting to see how the critical conversation is going, because you can't really judge the critical conversation based on 5 sources. But if you can use AI, you get a wider sense of well, what are people actually debating, and where are the gaps and ambiguities? And this is all an absolute win. And a lot of people in my school are doing stuff like this. And I sense not a lot of writing teachers around the country are, but this is kind of where I'm at 2 years in. I'm sort of leaning pretty heavily forward with the institutional backing of my school. Yeah, my school's keep going.
And how are the students reacting to all of it? Have there been any surprises you've noticed among students who 2 years ago, they weren't allowed to touch any of this stuff, and now you're actually encouraging them to play, experiment, observe, reflect on these AI tools? What is the vibe in the classroom? How are students kind of responding to these types of exercise?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We've done some AI work prior to this, and just reflecting on it, they definitely needed much more practice, I think, before I put them through this experience, because they were very much more taking the AI's word for what was kind of happening, and there was less pushing back on it than I would have liked to have seen. So that's just kind of a larger observation on what was happening. But their experiences were pretty positive. I sort of did some internal polling, and they didn't like so much the generic introductions and the generic blurbs about research. They felt like those were too hollow. They've come to be very critical of AI writing, which is kind of interesting.
So ironic.
Yeah, but they really liked having 20 different fieldwork options to kind of play with, kind of got their brains percolating. And I've done some writing about this. To do this AI work was somehow really compromising their whole research process. To bring in this outside material was somehow going to derail their creative process and their analytical process. It was going to introduce ideas that would somehow be sort of an obstacle. And it was something that I hadn't fully anticipated 2 years in. It's something that I have to continue to anticipate when I do these kind of exercises. So with those students, we had those conversations about the use even before they kind of got involved in it. And I kind of had to make some decisions on the spot, is it even worth for this student to pursue this activity? I mean, it was seriously emotional distress. So I had to modify the activity. It's just what happens when you're a teacher. The unexpected always happens. Our students are kind of all over with regards to what they want to do with these tools. For whatever reason, they've been on the receiving end of a lot of negative messaging about AI. I, as a teacher, am not here to force something that feels artificial.
Yeah, and echoing your earlier point about the importance of role modeling usage of AI as a teacher, how does that work for other teachers who haven't been exposed to it to your extent? How can they actively upskill themselves so that they can be better role models for their own students?
Yeah, well, there's really a lot you can do. We just put out a book, AI in Education, a roadmap for a teacher-led transformation. And we kind of walk through a pragmatic approach to teacher upskilling and really empathize with a teacher that's kind of struggling to figure things out right now. And it's definitely not good for students to have teachers different sides of the hallway operating in very different headspaces with regards to AI and
Wow,
kind
so
of.
it's actually a very polarizing issue.
Yeah, definitely.
I
Yeah,
didn't expect that. Okay.
you'll have some teachers kind of writing more inclusive policies, and this is also happening in universities. You can use AI in a very proactive way in one class, and then you can in another class you'll be punished. So it's hard for students to navigate.
And what's your guidance for teachers who are in the minority at their school, are interested in incorporating AI in their teaching and curriculum? How do they navigate that if they're not in the majority or if they don't have the backing of their institution?
Yeah, it's sort of to operate, cautiously. We all operate within like larger institutions of power. You have to sort of strategically make waves. There's a lot of ways of going about AI literacy. If you don't necessarily have access to tools, I'm seeing some big districts kind of signing on to licenses to products like School AI or Conmigo. This is starting to happen now, 1 or 2 years in. Schools are sort of interested in getting teachers to use AI for efficiency purposes, but maybe not so much in the classroom with students, because the research is just starting to amass that AI can lead to kind of positive learning outcomes. It's a slowly moving train with regards to things kind of trickling down to student use. So if you want to do more of like an AI critical studies course, you can print out some different AI outputs and you can kind of set up a lesson and you can have your students react and reflect upon some strengths and weaknesses of an AI response. And you can do that all without necessarily having access to a model. This is something that we kind of did in the early days, and a lot of teachers still kind of have to do. A lot of search engines are now doing AI generated toppers. And I think this is like a real area for AI literacy. So you can ask like students to kind of reflect on the quality of these like AI write-ups, because I'm thinking we're going to start to see a lot of information being drifting over into science, social studies, English papers. This is kind of where AI literacy is going to be going with students, is how do we react to this information? It's tertiary information. It's not secondary. It's tertiary. So can we cite this? Where's that information coming from? Like, we just have to open up the hood a little bit with students, and all of that can be done just with access to Google or a search or Gemini or just something that's going to get past most firewalls. So there's a lot of work to be done, but this is all sort of dancing around here is just like the larger need for AI literacy for teachers, where guys like myself come in terms of trying to take sort of impactful like presentations to schools that offer a little bit of guided insight, sort of like bridges from, I'm using Chat GPT at home, because I think most people now have had some sort of encounter with AI in this new form, and then thinking about how do you transition that into like an educational space. And we're seeing some schools investing in that, because it really is an investment in terms of upskilling your teachers,
And I love the resources that you're providing for the community. So you have your Substack called Educating AI, and then the new book, AI in Education. Can you talk a little bit about Pragmatic AI Solutions? So is that a company where you'll do these kinds of upskilling workshops for other teachers?
Yeah. So it's myself and we have a couple other trainers, and I'm in Dayton, Ohio, but we also travel and we do virtual trainings, and we build them specialty to whatever the needs are, wherever schools are in their response to AI. We also really try to tailor them in light of what a school has in development in terms of its own mission statement, its values, and we really like to work with the portrait of a graduate that schools really over the last 5 years, most schools have kind of committed to that, because we find that's like a really solid anchor for AI literacy curriculum. because schools have kind of set out, this is kind of who we want our graduates to be, and to like center AI literacy around those sort of attributes or skills. We found that to be very impactful. And we can come in and we can do a little bit in terms of opening up the hood in terms of like what is AI, but ultimately we just talk about the soft skills teachers need to develop to be critical users of these tools. And we can tailor the trainings to focus on teacher material development in terms of using AI to build instruction. And our teachers are having a lot of success skillfully using AI to build lesson plans. We have a lot of teachers who have made the transition to like outcomes-based or standards-based teaching who are really loving AI's ability to write excellent outcomes and generate amazing rubrics. And I'm an outcomes-based teacher myself. So we also are sort of the forefront in terms of thinking about AI as a tool that helps students with generative learning. So I'm kind of cooking up a larger project right now. And it's this whole idea that learning isn't passive. We're actively constructing meaning. I and sort of the group that I'm kind of working with, we really think that AI has the power to be a tool where students can actively construct meaning through critical engagement with these tools. So we're kind of building out workshops for schools who want to go in that direction.
What's been the biggest challenge in terms of implementation and integrating some of the AI literacy initiatives? So you do the workshop, but then in terms of integrating it into the daily classroom, what does that look like?
It's mostly about like tools allocation and in terms of infrastructure. Schools are having difficulty figuring out which are sort of the best tools to use. So, and we help schools kind of select the best tools that are out there in light of what they're trying to accomplish. So that's kind of one very real sort of concern. And those are kind of pretty high cost decisions too, particularly at like a district level. But I think the other real challenge is just sort of this fear on underlying concern from teachers that we're not doing the right thing by maybe moving forward with this program, with this kind of literacy initiative, just this pervasive sense that what's happening here in this space is being hoisted on us from Silicon Valley, and we as teachers have to resist. And so it's kind of the role as an AI trainer is to help teachers see that they do have a real role here in terms of power, and they have control in terms of how these tools enter the space. And they make choices all the way through from the top level, which the tools kind of come into school from how they're being used within classroom spaces.
They have agency too.
Yeah.
Is there like a particular light bulb moment that you try to get those folks to that will help them maybe see that there is a potential place for AI in the classroom, even if they have been resisting it up until that point?
Yeah, we really try to get teachers in front of the tools, and we use Ethan Mollick's role-playing exercise where we start to transition them away from thinking of AI as just sort of a uniform monolithic thing that has one voice, and that you can actually get it to speak in many different voices depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. And we'll often see some excitement with regards to that. We'll sort of set it up. What should be the long-term role of AI in education? And then we'll set up like 3 different roles, and the arguing antagonist and the agreeable friend, and then everyday Joe. And they'll start giggling a little bit. It will kind of lighten the mood. There'll be a little bit of playfulness. And what ends up happening in these trainings is they're actually like really hard to locked into a particular trajectory, because once the teachers start to like embrace the play of these systems, I mean, teachers are brilliant, and then they start like inputting their own stuff, and within 5 minutes they've already come up with 10 other ideas and use cases, and then you kind of know that something has kind of changed. You still might have one person in the room who's persistently asking the AI hard math questions and getting wrong answers, who's like hell bent on showing us how AI can't do math. That's kind of changing too now. It's kind of just getting them in front of the tools in a
Mhm.
space where it's not high stakes, and it's coming up with these like interactive activities and giving them just the time to play and interact. If I think about like how did I gain my skills with AI, it's just been through a lot of like iteration, a lot of play. Some of it's been high stakes work, but most of it's just been like behind the scenes exploration. And that's kind of how I'm sort of structuring my like curriculum in classes too. Like I've been doing a lot of writing on LinkedIn about even forward-leaning curriculum I've been seeing this year has been heavily like script. Use AI to do this in step one, step away, reflect. Use AI to do this in step two, step away, reflect. It's so like inorganic. So I wrote this one post about students. Let's give them like an idea and have them
Explore.
yeah,
Yeah. Let them
like
push the boundaries.
and this post like just went like crazy, everyone was like, whoa, we can do that. And yeah, you can. There's a lot of things to be concerned about. There's ethics concerns, there's biases, there's privacy concerns, but if you get a student on like a FERPA protected system and you've done a lot of scaffolding and you've worked them through some basic literacy curriculum, if you feel as a teacher that they're ready, and there's a lot to be said about teacher intuition, and I felt that my group was ready, and just kind of opened it up, and we had some really amazing experiences. And that whole experience of just trusting the students, and then you get these like sidebar conversations where they're just like, hey Dr. P, I actually use this tool to do this. I bet you 99% of teachers they'll have their students share like what AI tools they're using on the side. I think that's a major win for me. So if I can bring some of that energy to my AI trainings, get teachers to maybe relax for a moment and set aside those fears
And I think it is important, like going from the philosophical and the abstract and your preconceived notion of what
yeah,
AI is, and then actually getting in front, playing with it, noticing all the quirks, let's say, the
yeah, definitely.
hallucinations, the
Yes.
imperfection. And yeah, it definitely changes your perspective of it, especially if you thought about it before as like kind of a big, scary thing that you don't have much experience with. Then you start playing with it and you're like, okay, I can see how this would be useful here, not useful here. I
Yeah.
have to be careful of this. A tool in your arsenal, an incredibly powerful tool, but still
Right.
a tool with limitations.
Definitely. Definitely.
Also, I really enjoyed this conversation, Nick. Like all the
Yeah.
different things we've touched on, from education, how AI is kind of disrupting the model, the importance of AI literacy, role modeling, how to use AI for your students. Really amazing topics. For our listeners out there, how can they find out more information about your new book, AI in Education?
Well, it's available on Amazon, and we have it available on Kindle, and we just released it in paperback. So you can find links on my Substack, Educating AI, or it's also linked up at my website for Pragmatic AI Solutions. So find me also on LinkedIn, very active over there, constantly sharing out my thoughts and really day-to-day developments in my classroom.
Okay, awesome. Love it. Thank you so much for joining me on the
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great.